You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders, and I'm here with Dr. Paul Wegner, who usually has a Hebrew word of the day for us. But today we're talking about textual criticism, and so there's not a word for that in Hebrew, I don't think.
No.
But to get us kicked off, I had a question.
Okay.
An introductory question before you tell us all about textual criticism.
Okay.
Last week we talked about inerrancy. Can you tell me how inerrancy and textual criticism are related?
Yeah. Inerrancy wouldn't do any good if we didn't have textual criticism, because textual criticism is what finds hopefully the most original text of what we had.
Yeah.
So it doesn't do any good if we have inerrancy and don't know what the text is.
Yeah.
So that's how they fit together. Textual criticism is trying to find the most plausible original reading of the text. And then once you've got that, inerrancy is saying that is authoritative, that is inerrant, that is but the whole thing is, if we don't have this textual criticism to find out what that text is, it doesn't do us any good.
Yeah. So it's kind of a methodology in a way.
Yeah.
That's kind of our textual criticism. It's like the steps we're taking to actually make these discoveries. Is that kind of, would that be fair?
And I would actually call it like the foundation, basically, because if we didn't have that foundation that we're trying to find the exact text, then it doesn't do any good to have inerrancy.
Yeah, as an idea and a principle kind of. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's our basis.
Okay, that's good.
Okay.
Let's get into it.
All right, now, here's the common question. Is the Bible we have today accurate? And people are going to want to know that. To answer this question well, you have to know about textual criticism. Because if you don't, there's no way to actually answer that question, because there's no help that it gives us.
Well, and there's a lot of levels to that question, too, right? Like when we say, is it accurate, does that mean our translation in English is accurate to, to a variety of different sources? Is it accurate to what we think the original autographs were, right? I mean, this is all kind of included in this idea.
Yeah. All right, here's what the definition is. Textual criticism is the science and art that seeks to determine the most reliable reading of a text. And notice I put it science and art. Science is we're going to have rules and guidelines that you can follow. But then there's the art of actually going into the text and actually knowing those texts and know how does an author commonly spell a word, or how does how does he commonly say it?
Yeah.
So that's the art part, because it takes a lot of time to get the expertise to do that.
Yeah.
So that's why it's both.
That's good.
Oh, I didn't show you. That's P52. That's a little portion of John. Okay, probably about that big.
Yeah,
and it's
like 2 inches tall, something like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting. They date it to 125 to 175, somewhere in there, AD. Wow. Yeah, initially they thought it was an original manuscript, but now they realize it's not. Yeah.
And how did they figure that out? Are they able to date the paper?
They can.
What is it, papyrus?
Yeah, papyrus. But it's more likely the way the writing is.
Oh, really?
Because they can tell how did they write it at certain times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wait, one other thing about that one is there's writing on both sides. And that's kind of interesting, because that lets you know it's in a codex, which is a book form, not on a scroll.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's helpful. Christians were the first ones to use a book form.
A codex form?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
In general? Like in history?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Actually, we had we can probably talk about this right now, I guess. We had a big donation at the seminary recently of Bibles. Dr. Kuykendall and his brother donated a huge collection of Bibles. But one of the things that I learned in one of the presentations we had was that that's a big, a codex form saves a lot of papyrus, because you can write on the front and back. Like a scroll, they're so long, but you can only write on one side. But if you go on both sides of a piece of, paper, or really any surface, I guess, you get so much more surface area out of that.
And that's not only true, it's so much easier to use when you're trying to find something.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first codexes had multiple columns, just like their scrolls did.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that when you look at them, it was like opening up a scroll and it having the various columns like that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Oh, well. Okay, so Mark 19, or Mark 16, I've got the wrong thing.
No.
Sorry. Mark 16 is one of the bigger issues in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Where
this is a scary footnote if you don't know, you don't expect it.
Yeah. Is it original or isn't it?
Yeah.
So here's what it sounds like. And sorry about the number there. But go and tell his disciples, disciples and Peter, he is going to go before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he said to you. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now, that would be really interesting for a gospel to end that way, right? Gospel means good news, and it ends with them being afraid. Yeah. So after that, you've this next verse. Notice it's in italics. I did that so that you know there's a break there. And so now after he had risen on the first day of the week, he appeared to Mary Magdalene, from whom he cast out 7 demons. So that's almost a carry on to see how it probably should have ended.
Right.
However, a marginal note in the NASB reads, some of the oldest manuscripts omit verses 9 through 20. And some people are wondering, wait a minute, what's wrong with my Bible? I've got stuff in here that's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
And then there's a marginal note at verse 8 that says, see addition at the end of the chapter. And then this verse is there. And they promptly reported all these instructions to Peter and his companions. And after that, Jesus himself sent out through them from east to west a sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. So that's what's usually called the shorter reading. And then the longer reading is verses 9 through 20.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 different endings on this book.
Yeah.
Okay. What I did next is I went to the ESV Study Bible, because that usually gives you more information to try to explain what's going on. So in the notes it says, some ancient manuscripts of Mark's gospel contain these verses and others do not, which presents a puzzle for scholars who specialize in the history of such manuscripts. This longer ending is missing from the various old and reliable Greek manuscripts, especially Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, as well as numerous early Latin, Syriac, Armenian, and Georgian manuscripts. Early church fathers like Origen and Clement of Alexandria did not appear to know these verses. Eusebius and Jerome state this section is missing in most manuscripts available at their time. And
That's interesting.
Yeah, and some of the manuscripts that contain 9 through 20 indicate that the older manuscripts lack this section. On the other hand, some early and many later manuscripts, such as manuscripts known as A, C, or D, contain verses 9 through 20, and many church fathers, such as Irenaeus, evidently knew these verses. As for the verses themselves, they contain various Greek words and expressions uncommon to Mark, and there are stylistic differences as well. Many think this shows that verses 9 through 20 to be a later addition. And then here's their summary. In summary, verses 9 through 20 should be read with caution. As in many translations, the editors of the ESV have placed this section within brackets, showing their doubts as to whether it is originally part of what Mark wrote, but also recognizing that long history of acceptance by many of the church in the church. The content of verses 9 through 20 is best explained by reference to those passages in Gospels and the rest of the New Testament. Most of its content can be found elsewhere, and no point of doctrine is affected by the absence of verses 9 through 20. With particular reference to verse 18, that's the one questionable, there is no command to pick up serpents or drink deadly poison. There's merely a promise of protection, as found in other parts of the New Testament. So that's still got to scare people, right?
Yeah.
Even if you started reading this and had no idea what it was talking about, man, you're wondering what's wrong with my Bible?
Yeah.
And I think that's why we need to know this.
Yeah.
So even at the very bare minimum, why we'd need this is that enough translations put stuff like this in it that if you have no idea what they're talking about, you'd think, well, my Bible is flawed or something's wrong with it. So it is something that's really crucial.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So what are we to do about these passages? First of all, realize that there are not very many of this type of passages.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest one, right?
Yeah, because if you think they're all over, then your Bible is got a problem. But when you realize there's only a couple of these in the whole New Testament and a few of them in the Old, then it's a lot easier to understand. And then second, learn about textual criticism so that you can help answer these questions. I've done this presentation in Sunday school classes.
Oh, nice.
And the reason I did it is because I knew that they were going to come up in their Bibles with
Yeah.
these phrases that are going to scare them to death.
Yeah.
So I thought, if I can find an easy way to do it, and I know it's going to be a little complicated, but I think we can talk through it so it'll be at least understandable.
Okay.
All right? Here's the evidence. There's about 300 manuscripts of the Old Testament and about 5,487 manuscripts of the New Testament. The reason I said about is because they're finding new ones all the time, so I have to be careful there. These can be checked and evaluated among themselves to determine the most accurate reading of the biblical text. This is called textual criticism.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to do today.
Now, with those numbers, are those like complete kind of manuscripts?
No.
Or partials, kind of a mix?
A mix.
All of it, kind of?
Yeah, yeah. About the 300 manuscripts of the Old Testament, there was just one yesterday that went up, or I think it's going up today
No
for
kidding.
sale in what's it called? There's a place that sells.
Like an auction house
Yeah.
kind of thing?
Oh, and it's really well known. I can't remember the name of it now, but it's going for like $30 to $50 million.
Wow.
And it is the oldest known Masoretic text
Wow.
out there, and it's dated to about 900 A.D.
Now, something like that, has that already been like studied and picked through, or has it kind of just been studied enough to prove its age?
Probably
And when
that.
it's sold, that's when kind of,
Yeah.
depending who gets it, if they're open to it, I guess, that's
Yeah.
when a serious kind of study would come through and
Yeah.
get added into like our manuscript list.
And we knew about it because it was in a pretty well-known manuscript collection. But then for the last, I think it was 50 years, it's been in a private collection, and nobody has really got a chance to study it. I'm hoping something like a library or something like that gets it so
Yeah.
that they can actually do some studies on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
So, all right, we are in a better position today than Sotheby's. That's the name I was trying to think of.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. All right, we are in a better position today than any other time to be able to compare the accuracy of biblical text. In the last 50 to 100 years, many of those most important manuscripts have been found, like the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
That was an amazing thing, like in the 50s,
Yeah.
and still were being found afterwards. And then many Greek manuscripts have been found since then. So that's why we're in a good position today.
Yeah.
So the step one is you need to know some of the most common copying mistakes. And what I did is I'm going to give you just a couple of them. Mistaken letters, like a U for a V, that'd be easily
Yeah.
in English.
Yeah.
What I found in John 12:28 is there's a change, a variant in one of them that is either your name or my name. And so the question is, well, which one is it? And here's what the letters actually look like. So that first one is actually a Samic, and that second one is a Mem.
Yeah.
A mu. I'm sorry, I'm doing Hebrew. Anyway, so that's so you can actually see that if somehow it gets like if there's a corruption in the text, or even if there's a hole in the text, it might be easy to mistake those letters.
Sure, yeah.
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 So another one would be homophony, words that sound alike but are spelled differently.
Okay.
And those are examples. I've got one here that's it's not exactly that, but the autos versus hotos or hatu.
Yeah.
I mean, the first one is hatu. So you can actually see those ones could sound a little different, but sound enough. And then one is in him and one in himself.
Yeah.
So they're
very
close enough.
closely related.
Yeah, in meaning even. So, all right, so that's homophony. And then haplography is omission of a letter or a word. Like for occurrence, you spell it with only one R instead of two. Okay.
Yeah.
I found in John 1, I've got all these names for the different variations of John. The first one is John, and that's the normal way you would spell it. The next one is actually, it's got some letters missing. Well, that would make it actually Jonah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's got enough. And then the next one is John again, but it's actually spelled a little differently.
Yeah.
So you've basically got some changes in that. But the one I wanted to show you is like sometimes that first one has double nuns news, and the second one only has one.
Right.
And that's a common mistake kind of thing.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about that
last
week too, and what that would mean.
Yeah.
Which maybe it's just like it could be a mistake, but it could also be just, this is how we spell it now, or this is how we spell it in this part of the world, and so we wrote it this way.
On the first two there, it does actually make a difference whether it's John or Jonah.
Yeah.
But then the second one, or the third one,
first and third would be
the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Dittography is another one. You write 2 letters instead of 1. Okay. And we do those ditto marks to make it sound. That's how I remember it.
Yeah.
All right. Metathesis is switching around words or letters, and I thought that John and Jonah is another way to do that, because if you look on the bottom here, those 2 letters in the middle are actually switched around.
Yeah. That'd be easy. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's harder, like in typing, it's really easy to do that kind of mistake. In writing, it's a little harder, but if they're not certain about the spelling, it would be fairly easy.
Yeah.
All right. Another one would be fusion, putting words together that should have been divided. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
And so the first one is ha-ti, and the next one's haughty. You put it together.
Yeah.
And it means a little different depending on which word it is.
Well, and that's especially true. I mean, that's easy to do when you're typing.
Yeah.
But when you're writing, it's not like there's like standard space. Just as you write, you may accidentally put things closer together or further apart. And you would be able to look at it immediately and know what you're saying.
And what I would actually let you know is that these were probably initially written in capital letters. We call them uncials. And it's fairly sometimes difficult to see the spacing on those. And then just think about if you had a manuscript that then shrunk, because remember they're on Hebrew, on skin or
like a leather
vellum or something like that. It can shrink a little. I actually saw the Isaiah scroll, and I thought it was just a huge manuscript, and because I've seen pictures of it. Well, actually, I saw the real thing one time, and it's a lot smaller than you think it is, and I think it's because it shrunk,
right?
Because the stuff just dried out.
Yeah.
So anyway, things like that can actually cause problems too.
Yeah.
Fission is putting words together that should have been split apart. Okay, so
kind of the opposite.
Yeah, fusion's putting them together, fission splitting them apart. And then I've got omission, like John 5:4. That whole verse is missing in some manuscripts. So, okay, so those are the kind of things that can happen.
And these are basically these are kind of the categories for sure, comparing manuscripts.
Yeah.
To kind of explain maybe why there's differences.
Yeah. So if you're looking at a text and you can see the various, we call them variants.
Yeah.
And we don't call them errors because
Yeah.
we don't actually know if they are errors.
That's true. Yeah.
But they're different readings of a text. Yeah. So we're actually looking at those to see how they fit together. And some of these kind of mistakes can actually help us know, this one might be more correct than this one. So,
which I assume probably also helps you. I mean, I'm sure like various manuscripts probably have the same types of variants in them. Would that be correct?
Sometimes
you'll see like fusion multiple times in one.
Yeah. These kind of things are usually done accidentally.
Yeah.
There's actually some mistakes that are commonly made. And I'll show you some in the Hebrew text that are a lot more common. But there's something called a kathiv and kareh in the Hebrew text. A kathiv is how it's normally written. Kareh is how it's normally read. So they think there is an error in there, so they've actually got it reading differently than it's written.
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
So, yeah. And there's even some what are called perpetual karehs, meaning the name for God is always spelled this way. And we know it's incorrect, but it's that's how it's written.
Yeah.
So anyway,
okay,
all right, okay. What I want to do second is examine the evidence.
Okay.
And the best way to do this is go to the Greek Bible and find a place that has variants on a page. So this is Ephesians, and it's basically the first verse. You've got, I don't know if you can see that brackets there, but that brackets in Ephesus is in brackets, and then there's a little one.
Yeah, actually in the text, not like the brackets you put in.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry. So you can see my little circle there.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the first variant on the page of the Greek Bible, and this one has 2. You can see the second one is at the end of verse 6. And then so that's where the variant is. You then go down to the textual notes and see what the difference is. So what I've got is that first box is all the information to tell me about that. What reading, what manuscripts have that reading.
Yeah.
So this is a lot of, the scholars have done a lot of work for us. They've checked all those manuscripts and found out that this is the reading in each one of those.
Yeah.
So this is a Greek Bible with the textual notes on the bottom is a landmine of just beautiful, hard work that they've done for us.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's amazing. All right, so that's the first thing. All right, then you go down to your box. So I'm going to do the first variant, and it's that box there.
That first footnote. Yeah.
So now what I've done is I've blown it up so you can actually see it. All right, so you can see there's a little one and then a big one. That little one means it's the first one on the page. That next one tells me what verse it's in.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then there's a letter C. Okay, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute.
Another kind of bracket.
Yeah, and then I've got in Ephesus. Okay, so
that's the actual Greek text.
That's the Greek text. Now, if you'll go all the way down and see to the double slash lines, you'll see the next reading is to omit it. So this one actually has 2 readings there. Okay, now this will explain it. This variant has 2 readings that are possible in this verse. The first one is in Ephesus. You see it up there. And the evidence goes all the way to the double slash lines. So that means...
Yeah, pretty significant.
Yeah, in
a lot
Ephesus
of sources.
has all these different sources all the way to this one.
So all those numbers are numbers of manuscripts.
Yep.
And kind of like the name of it.
And I'll show you that in a minute. I've got another explanation. And then the second reading is, notice it says omit, so it doesn't have it in. Okay?
It just is. That means for this variant,
Yep.
the variation is that it's missing.
Yes.
Or it doesn't have this in these other manuscripts.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. All right. And then there's also, the first thing you'll find in that note is a letter from A to D, and it tells the amount of certainty of the reading. See, ours is a C.
Oh.
So that goes, okay, A is most certain,
Yeah.
D is least certain.
Yeah.
And so what they've done is that, and then B and C is somewhere in between those. But what they've done is they've argued that they've put it in and put it in brackets, but given it a C reading to say, we don't think it's supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Means it's pretty uncertain that it's supposed to be there.
Yeah.
They've got a good reason for that, and we'll see what they say in a minute. Okay? All that makes sense?
I think so. And that grade is only for what they say is the first explanation, essentially, right?
Oh, no, it's for the whole thing, the whole variant.
Okay.
So their amount of certainty as to whether they've got it right is a C reading, and it means...
According to all the sources, basically.
all the
I
stuff
see.
that they've
Okay.
evaluated.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now, all that reading goes to the slash marks, okay? Then it'll give you all that evidence. It gives you in a certain order. So let me show you what that order is. All right. So the first, if you have a P like that, that means papyrus. So if you look over here, do you see a
in
P
the omission section.
46?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's papyrus number 46. Papyrus is almost all, you saw that P52. It's on papyrus and it's in uncials. That's our earliest kind of reading usually. Okay. Then it could also be a letter or a number beginning with 0, and that's an uncial manuscript too.
Okay.
See what happened? They started with a P, and they ended up having so many that they needed to find a different way. They needed to be able to distinguish whether it was written on papyrus or some other writing, and so because they were both in uncial writing, they needed to know, what kind of material is it on?
Yeah.
So the letters are probably in parchment or something other than papyrus.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
All right. So if it has a 0 before it, that's an uncial also. And then if it's a number with no 0 before it, it's a minuscule manuscript.
Okay.
And minuscule, I'll show you what it looks like in a minute. Byzantine lectionary is a second, another kind. And what those are those are church readings through the calendar year, and they had certain readings at certain times. But people didn't have a Bible that they
Yeah.
could actually do the reading. So what they did is they would read it from the text or from the pulpit, and they'd have it in certain order, so they knew what was this reading for this week, what was for the next week.
So
and
in the
stuff like that.
lectionary,
Yeah.
a separate document essentially.
Yeah.
They would have copies of specific verses for whatever was supposed to be read.
Yes.
That day.
Yeah. Okay. Then there's versions like ancient translations, and then church fathers.
Yeah.
So that's the order. Now let me
Meaning
just
church fathers like referencing it
Yes.
in some kind of way in their writing. Not necessarily a full copy of it, but that it's like
Right. It'd probably be a commentary or something.
Yeah,
They'd put
yeah,
a
yeah.
little note in it,
Yeah.
and you'd see the Greek text there.
yeah, okay.
Okay. All right. So here's what a papyrus would look like. This is P46. It's got almost all of the Pauline epistles and Hebrews in it.
Wow.
Yeah. I wished I could have made that a little clearer, but sorry about that. Okay, this is Codex Sinaiticus. Notice it's going to have a special letter.
It goes before the numbers though.
Yeah, these will be letters. And then what happened is there's so many of them that they had to start putting numbers with zeros before them so that you'd know it was.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they could number them all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Codex Sinaiticus is pretty important. This one is Luke 11 to Unvellum. Okay, so that's the next one. Then there's going to be minuscule. This is what a minuscule would look like. And this is minuscule 105. So you can actually see what it looks like.
Oh, it's so different looking, really.
Yeah.
You can really tell it's a very different, like, just style of writing.
So let's go back here. So those look like
They're
capital letters.
Right.
And these would be more like cursive almost.
Yeah, they're connected. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Here's a Byzantine lectionary. So you can see the Greek text in there, and they would read that. And
Yeah, that's beautiful.
here's this one is Codex Sinaiticus because it's a version.
Okay.
Okay. And there's a church father. He had actually written notes on a Greek text. Okay. This was from Origen's text of Jude.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to show you that so you'd have some idea what they would look like.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Second, the next thing you need to know is there's two types of variants. Some are accidental.
Yeah.
And some are intentional. And you're going, why would they make intentional ones?
Yeah.
Hang on to that thought
Okay.
a minute. Okay. Let's look at the accidental ones are things we've already looked at.
Yeah, like
right?
those 8 categories or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. These are ones that are made by the scribes thinking that they were correcting a text or alleviating a problem in the text.
That's the intentional variance.
Yes. The intentional ones would be ones where they thought it was embarrassing or something like that to have it the reading it was. Let me give you an example. In Genesis, this is from the Old Testament. In Genesis 18:22, the scribes actually switched 2 words around. This actually says, "And Abraham remained standing before the Lord." It originally read, "And the Lord remained standing before Abraham." And what happened is initially it didn't mean anything like it came to mean that the lesser person was standing before the greater person.
Right.
So if you had God standing before Abraham, it would make it look like the lesser person was standing before the greater person. They couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what they did is they changed these 2 words around, and they actually tell us in the notes that they did that.
Wow.
Okay. So initially it wasn't read
Yeah.
like that because it didn't have that kind of a flavor.
Right.
It came to mean that, and so they intentionally switched it around.
Yeah.
Anytime
They included a note.
yes, anytime they intentionally switch it around, they let you know that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. All right. Another example is, can you see this nun that's up above the line here?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see how those letters right along, and then this one letter sticking clear up above. That's in Judges 18:30. The sons of Dan set up for themselves graven images, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. It would be really embarrassing for a person who set up false images to be related to Moses.
Yeah.
And so what they did is they actually said he's a son of Manasseh because his actions made it sound like he's more like Manasseh than he is like Moses.
Right.
Manasseh is probably referring to the king who's the real wicked king of all of Israel. He's not going to be around for another 1,000 years. Okay, but they thought it was too embarrassing to have Moses be related to this Gershom. So they actually, or Jonathan, and they changed it.
Wow.
Again, they tell us they did that. And this one's pretty clear because it's sticking up above the line.
Yeah.
So once again, the scribes tell us they did it, and they're doing it because it's some kind of like an embarrassment that they couldn't tolerate. That would be just too embarrassing for them.
And like in a modern English translation, it would have the same. Would it say Manasseh? Do you think? And then we'll have a note that says.
Yeah, it probably would have a note, but I'll bet it would say Manasseh.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah. All right. So those were the intentional and unintentional.
Yeah.
Now there's two other classes.
Okay.
One would be external evidence, and the other is internal evidence.
Okay.
External evidence are any of the other manuscripts that you're going to be able to find. So it's outside of the text that you have.
Yeah.
Internal evidence will be anything in the book itself. So let's say we've got this text and it reads a certain way. If there's anything in that text itself that will help us know which one is more accurate, that's internal evidence.
Yeah.
Like the way a scribe usually spells something, or the way he says certain stylistic things that he has.
Yeah.
So those would be common idioms and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay? And then external evidence will be all the church fathers, the other manuscripts.
Basically anything, kind of.
All that other stuff. Yep. Okay. All right, so let's go back to our original text that we were looking at.
Yeah, the footnote from Ephesians.
Yeah, and so this is a textual note from Ephesians,
I'm sorry,
right?
a textual note. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got in Ephesus is the first one, and omit is the second one.
Yeah.
So the external evidence would be all those letters and various manuscripts there, and even on this one. All right, external evidence. Because there's so many look at that one. We've got, I don't know how many are there, over 100 probably different pieces of evidence, right?
In support of it.
Yeah.
Or total.
Yeah. In support of that reading. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 7 or 8 of these ones for this omitting it. Well, if you just looked at it and you just said, "Oh, look, there's so much more," obviously that's the correct reading. But what we have to do is we have to date it and evaluate it to see if that's correct. So what this is, the date, usually the earliest manuscript is more likely correct. And the reason is because the more times it gets copied, the more chances it has of getting an error in it. So what I've done here is I've tried to show, okay, let's say we've got all these manuscripts. Let's say that top one is the autograph, and then it gets copied 4 times in the first century. Then after that, each one of those 4 gets copied multiple times. Okay, and what I try to do is 2 things. Let's say that the one manuscript went to where Byzantium or Byzantine area, and they all kind of look alike because when every time that they have a mistake, they all copy that same mistake.
Right.
So what happens is every time the mistake is made, it gets more and more and more, and it just stays in there. So that means that the Byzantine text type, is what we're going to call it, are quite similar because they have similar changes in them. That would mean that the Alexandrian and the Western would also have same kinds of changes because the mistakes that were made in the earlier ones are going to be transferred down. So that's why the date is most likely we've got to evaluate, and then whether it's a good manuscript or not. Because remember, in the New Testament time period, anybody that thought they could write and had access to a manuscript could copy it. That's not the way it is in the Old Testament, right? Because they had a whole group of scribes. That's their whole job, was to do that. But in the New Testament, that's not true. So you have a lot more manuscripts, but they might be of various qualities. Might not be as good as if a scribe did it.
This almost looks like a genealogical kind of study. You're kind of seeing a family tree almost.
That's what I'm trying to show you.
It's very fascinating. Now you have in here too, like some of them they cross, because I guess as you go further down, you'll start. Some of these people may be using different sources from different lines. Essentially, right?
Let's think about it. Let's say Origen goes to Rome. And so when he's in Rome, he actually takes his manuscripts and he compares it with it. So there could be people interacting with either manuscripts too. And even into the different gene types.
Right.
So, Okay, I thought that would be helpful for us to understand.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And this is part of the task of textual criticism is mapping this essentially.
That's right.
So you can kind of put some reasoning behind the variants and see where they came from, how far back they potentially started occurring, and how that relates to other. Yeah. Because all this is going to tell you more and more how reliable
a text is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And look what I've done. I've only gone into the 4th century.
Yeah.
But this could, we've got manuscripts all the way to the 12th, 13th, 14th century.
Yeah.
So it goes a lot further, and you can have a lot more mistakes in that time
and
period.
this still happens today.
Sure.
Even,
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually one of the cool, I know I already mentioned that Kuykendall collection, but one of the things I had never heard of before, it's the He Bible and the She Bible.
Yeah.
Where it's two versions, very early versions
of the same year, 1611.
And it's like the King James, essentially.
Yeah.
And is it in Ruth? I think, is it Ruth?
It is.
There's like one copy it says she, and one says he.
Yeah.
And so that's a mistake, a very small mistake, but that tells you so much information.
Yeah.
Like if this version of the Bible was printed later after it was fixed, that means they were using this older typeset or whatever. Like all these things, like you can just get so much information from it. But that's a big that's how they categorize these whole types of Bible. It's the He Bible or the She Bible.
And remember, that was once printing started.
Yeah.
This is way before that even.
Right.
So anyway, so we've got dating is going to be important and quality. And what we've done on the quality is we've tried to determine text families, like which ones are the earliest and have the usually more accurate readings.
Yeah.
And they think that Alexandrian was one of the earliest ones and actually has a lot of Jews fled to Alexandria, Egypt, and that's where they think they took the manuscripts from Jerusalem and took them there.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons they think it's most accurate, because it's earliest, and they still had a pretty good group of scribes that copied these.
And that plays into this by saying if you have a variant between maybe something of the same age, but one is Alexandrian, you may give a little more credence to that one.
Yes. Yeah. Now, please remember, all of this is real simplified. It's a real complicated thing, but I'm trying to make it so that people can understand the process more.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we've got the Alexandrian family. We got the Western family, which is centered around Rome, and then Byzantine family, which is centered around Byzantium, because Rome was the church in the West, and before long, Byzantium is going to be the church in the East.
Yeah.
So these are going to be centers that have a lot of manuscripts around them.
Yeah.
What we found is that in the Byzantine text type, a lot of times there's what we call sophisticated changes, like harmonization. Like if they know that, and I'll show you this in a minute, if they know that a manuscript reads a certain way in another gospel, sometimes they might combine the readings of them. Like a common one is like Jesus in one of the gospels, and then another one might have Jesus Christ, and so you'd have them combined in other manuscripts.
I see.
So, I'll show you an example of something like that. But does this make sense?
Yeah.
So we've got date that we want to evaluate, and what family, earliest, and which quality is it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. The manuscripts must be weighed and not counted. So what I'm going to do now is, how do we evaluate that internal evidence? Okay? And the reason manuscripts must be weighed and not counted, because you saw that a lot of those manuscripts had a lot, that one first reading. Yeah. And there's tons of them.
Right.
Yeah. So manuscripts are likely copied from each other, and often the manuscripts are in the same area, and so they're related.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Most manuscripts are dated later, and by that time there could be many mistakes in the tradition. Okay? Earlier manuscripts are more likely to be more accurate. So that's why weighing them makes a lot more sense than just counting them.
Yeah.
Okay? Thus, we need to weigh manuscripts to make sure of their possible accuracy rather than just counting them. Yeah. Okay? Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. A second one is the shorter reading is generally preferable.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the reason is, since biblical texts are believed to come from God, scribes have a tendency to add things to clarify, not remove them.
Yeah.
And that would make sense. If you thought this was an authoritative text, you're not going to play around with removing things from it. At least very likely that you would. Okay? A very sophisticated type of change happens when a scribe combines readings from various parallel passages. For example, one passage may have the name Jesus, another have Jesus Christ, and a third may have Lord Jesus Christ. That could be when the scribe combines them, that could be what's called harmonization.
Yeah.
So he's trying to make it look like the other reading that was there.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's why a shorter reading is generally preferred.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay? All right, the third one, determine the reading that would most likely give rise to the others. If you can figure out why a scribe would do make a certain change, that can sometimes help us. So what they've got there is if there's a plausible reason how a variant could have arisen, that could be a way that can help us determine which one would be more likely the first reading or original reading.
I think I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Like if we know that one's gospel has a tendency to use the word immediately, like the Gospel Mark, okay, it may be plausible that a scribe would add that word to a text, even though it may not have had it initially. They may add it in because they know the scribe commonly does that.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just reading Mark recently, and I'm going, immediately pops up almost all the time.
Yeah.
So I could certainly understand why that's possible.
Yeah.
Okay, number 4, determine which reading is most appropriate in context. At the end of the day, you're still going to have to evaluate whether it fits the context or not.
And that's probably more the art side a little bit.
Yeah. Yep.
Kind of taking all the information.
And evaluating.
Yeah.
Yep. Sometimes scribes have a tendency to use specific vocabulary, and thus it would be plausible for them to say it in a specific way. Okay. Sometimes a specific grammatical construction is commonly used, and thus may fit a context better than another reading.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes a parallel passage suggests a specific reading of another passage may be helpful. Okay.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of things that we evaluate, and that, like you said, now's the art is coming in.
Yeah.
Okay. And then examine parallel passages. Not all passages have parallel passages.
Sure.
Okay. But those that do, it can help us see, and at least try to evaluate which one is possibly the more original reading.
Now, what all counts as a parallel passage? I'm sure the gospel, like Matthew, Mark, and Luke would have a lot of parallel passages.
Yep. There would be things like in the Old Testament, you've got Kings and Chronicles, Samuel Chronicles.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So you've got things like that. But sometimes even like in the Old Testament, you've got a psalm that's quoted in Samuel. So it could even be things like that.
Yeah.
Micah actually is quoted in Jeremiah.
Yeah.
So it's those kind of things that are going to have overlaps in them.
Would that also kind of count for like New Testament quoting Old Testament, or does that get a little bit of a different category?
It's a little different category, but it can still help us.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the readings should
align,
be still aligned. Yeah. Sometimes these passages are not exactly parallel, and they commonly have similar wordings. Like Pauline letters commonly begin with Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus, to the saints who are, and then where they are. Yeah. So that can help us too.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So that's now you go. So step 3 is starting to evaluate the evidence. First, you collect it.
Yep.
Now we're going to evaluate it.
Yeah.
And we've already started doing that. The date and the quality of it.
Yeah.
So here's what we've got. We've got that is Sinaiticus right there. Sorry, couldn't remember. So an aleph is the thing for the sign for it.
That's the symbol for it.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you can see, but do you see that little C? That C means a corrector of Sinaiticus. So that means that they've actually looked at Sinaiticus and they can see 2 handwritings in it. They can see that at one spot it has been corrected by another handwriting. So that's where that C comes in.
Meaning the source that agrees to this is a corrected source, or specifically this
variant. Yes,
this variant has that correction thing in it.
What you're going to find out is, look here, the next one has a little star. That means the original handwriting. So I
see that. Yeah.
Okay,
in the omit.
Yeah, in the omit. Yeah. So Sinaiticus in the original reading does not seem to have had it. It was filled in by another corrector.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll have, like, C is the first corrector, but you'll have 2 and 3 and 4 sometimes numbers after that.
Wow.
So they can actually tell the handwriting of the person who's modified the text.
Which I would assume then if you're going to have that in the opposing evidence, I suppose, you'll see the kind of matching
a lot
marked. It'll be telling you kind of where exactly it kind of comes in.
And look what happened on the next one. Do you see Vaticanus, the B?
Yeah, same thing, right?
So it has a star on it's omitted.
Yeah.
They actually have a third handwriting that actually. So that means they saw two other handwritings in the text, and now this is a third that's modified it.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's amazing the amount of work that people have done to actually look at these texts.
I mean, and then to condense that into a textual note is amazing.
Yeah.
If you want to go check the textual note, what are you looking for? Copies of these manuscripts, essentially?
Yeah, then you go back to Sinaiticus or Vaticanus, depending which it was, to see what the reading was.
And are those pretty accessible, like digital versions of those things somewhat?
You can get them, yeah. They're getting more and more accessible than they've ever been before.
Sure.
So that's the good news.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So an A, okay, that's Codex Alexandrinus. Oh, I'm sorry. For the Sinaiticus, that Aleph, that first one, it says Corrector of Codex Sinaiticus after the 4th century Alexandrian family. So we've got the date because Codex Sinaiticus is dated to the 4th century.
Yeah.
That means if there's a corrector in it, that means it has to be after that.
Yeah.
Because it couldn't be the first original writing.
Right.
And then it's from the Alexandrian family because Codex Sinaiticus, it was found close enough to Alexandria that's where it fits. And it matches the,
has a lot
the
of the
writing.
same.
Yeah. Okay. Codex Alexandrinus, you can imagine where that's from. It's from the 5th century Alexandrian family. Codex Vaticanus, third handwriting, that's what that 3 is all about, after the 4th century, because Codex Vaticanus is dated to the 4th century. Yeah. Now, we can't actually tell exactly when after that, but we just know it's after that.
Yeah. You're kind of putting a front end.
Yeah,
like
date on it.
Earliest possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
D is Codex Clarimontanus, 6th century Western family. I put 33 up here. You can see the manuscript because it's often called the Queen of the Cursives, which means it's a very accurate reading, even though it's 9th century.
Yeah.
It's the smaller writing, but it has some very accurate readings in it. So that's what it's commonly called. And so it's Alexandrian family, 9th century. Then the Vulgate is usually dated about 400.
Yeah.
Syriac, about 400. Coptic can be anywhere from 300 to 400. So those are kind of the dates.
Oh, I think I see them in there.
Yeah.
They're like
VG is Vulgate,
VG,
and V.
SYR.
Yeah, that's Syriac. And then there's Sahidic and Bohairic. So on the Coptic, I can't remember the Syriac has two common. What
kind of like major.
Divisions of the language, and Coptic, Sahidic, and Bohairic, that's 2 of them. Gothic, Armenian, and then after that has the Church Fathers. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And so anyway, what I tried to do is give you some of the evidence. It doesn't do. I could keep going, but it doesn't do any good once you get into the 9th centuries and stuff like that. It's not a whole lot of help, I don't think.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's the one reading. Let's go to the other reading. Now we've got P46.
So this is in the omission section.
Yeah, this is omitting
the
it.
Textual note.
Yeah, so it's an Uncio from the 2nd century Alexandrian family.
Yep.
Sinaiticus has the original handwriting. Okay. Alexandrian family. Vaticanus has the original handwriting. Okay. Marcion. He's a heretic in the early church century. Church fathers.
Yeah.
But even heretics have some pretty good texts sometimes.
Sure, yeah.
So we can examine his, even though he's a heretic, we can still examine his writings.
Yeah.
And then Origen he died 254.
Yeah.
Now
you have Tertullian up there too, who's another early.
Yep. One other thing that's helpful is, do you see the VID?
Yeah.
VID means that it's a most likely reading, but for some reason it can't be completely confirmed. Like there might be a hole in the manuscript, or a dark spot, or a tear. Yeah. Anything like that that doesn't make it. So what usually it is, they have enough room for it, but there might, and they think it's there, but they can't confirm it. Okay. Okay. So let's go back. Yeah. So you see, we've got some really early manuscripts, and they appear to be in pretty good families. So what the evidence, just looking at this, the external evidence is that in Ephesus has a lot of readings and even some early, but it would seem like that the omitting it has even better because of the earlier and the quality.
Right.
So more than likely, I would actually say based upon this, it seems more likely that omitting is the earlier reading.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that kind of fits that principle of the internal evidence too, of
Yeah.
the shorter reading can sometimes be the more accurate one.
Yeah. Okay. So now this is a summary of what there is a commentary on the textual notes.
Sure. Yeah.
So Metzger is
man.
one of them that has done a commentary, and what it does is it tells you why they did the readings they did, and so it's real helpful
Yeah, I'm
because
sure,
now
yeah.
you're hearing from the editors themselves on why they did that reading.
Yeah.
So here's what they say. Notice the editors of the Greek New Testament include the phrase in Ephesus, but put them in brackets to indicate that they were not in the earliest text. However, it seems unusual that Paul did not include the name of the church that he was writing to. This was his common practice, right? So based upon the evidence given above, the earliest manuscripts did not have the phrase in Ephesus, and there's the early manuscript evidence, but later on, it appears to be there. Modern New Testament scholars believe that the book of Ephesus was written as a circular letter to the churches in the region of Galatia, but that the original was sent to Ephesus, and then they copied it and sent it to the other churches. Thus, the place where the name of the church was left blank until the copyist knew what church it was going to. Then they would put the name in. This seems reasonable and helps explain the evidence given above. It's interesting that one manuscript, I'm going to show you this, actually has it's a manuscript of the Ephesians, but it has to the Laodiceans.
Wow.
So that actually helps confirm what we were thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. And now I've got a map here to show you. So here's Ephesus. These other churches are around it, and that would make sense that they could send it to the bigger church in Ephesus, and then they could send it to the others.
Yeah.
So at least it logically makes sense, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, what I put on here is now, we agree that the rating of this variant is a C level. And the reason is because there seems to be pretty good evidence that this was a circular letter, but Ephesus appears to be the main city in that area, but we can't totally confirm it.
Yeah.
So that's why a C reading rather than a B or an A reading.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think so, because the C is really referring to in Ephesus being in the text.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's like this is here, because you're saying this is the variant. This is here kind of now. We see this really commonly.
Yeah.
We're grading it saying like maybe not super likely.
Yeah, originally anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so I think the logic helps us understand this one.
Yeah.
All right, so now we've got our summary. Textual criticism is crucial for determining the most plausible original reading of the Bible. That's where inerrancy comes in, right?
Yeah.
Because if we couldn't do this, inerrancy is meaningless. Like if we don't know what the text is, then finding saying it's inerrant doesn't do us any good.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. We are in a better position today than we've ever been before to determine the most plausible reading of the biblical text. That's the good news.
Yeah.
Okay? Our goal is to determine the most likely reading of the original reading of the text.
Yeah.
And that's our goal.
Yeah.
So it's complicated, but I think it helps you to understand how they do it more now.
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense so that they could say, if somebody comes up in your church and says, man, look at my Bible, it looks like it's flawed. It's got this thing that says this isn't in the original manuscripts.
Yeah.
At least now you'll be able to explain to them what that means and that that's not terrible. That's actually really good because that means we're all working together to try to figure out what that original reading was.
Yeah, I think the scope of it is a little intimidating and overwhelming.
Yeah.
But really, I guess the scope is also kind of part of what's comforting about it.
Yeah.
And I guess sometimes when you're reading in an English translation, you may have really short footnotes. If you have like an ESV study Bible, you'll have more that'll be a little more in there, but it can still feel very
intimidating,
summarized. Intimidating, but it's also because it's so short. But that's a very, very small, short summry of
all the work that went
decades
into
and
it.
decades of work and pulling all these different sources and comparisons and and this is a little bit harder to get into for sure. And even you probably need like a guide to understand if you're going to get into this and you don't have any history in it, just to understand what this textual note is, like you almost need like the list of, here's all the, this is what the aleph means, all these things to help you understand it. But there's a lot of work that's been done, a lot of hard work, and very detailed work that goes into this. And it really does, I think that always, when you first see it, it is frightening, but then it can be very comforting to know, like, we do a very reliable, version of the Bible.
I was going to tell you, what I used to do is have my students go through the Greek Bible and do a couple of these so that they knew how to do it. And it did two things. It helped them to see that the variants are often very piddly. You or me.
Him, himself. That kind of thing.
So it's going to be really almost inconsequential to the meaning of it.
Yeah. But still important to study and know.
Yeah, but that's one thing I think it helps us on. Second thing is that they're not very often in the New Testament. I think I once figured it out. It's like 0.07% of the text, and in the in the Old Testament, it's about the same. It's not much different.
Yeah.
So that's a really small percentage of the text.
Yeah.
So I think that's helpful too.
Yeah, it is. It's very helpful.
Well, that was it.
That was good.
I hope
that was really
helps.
good.
Yeah,
I think that's super helpful. It's really good. It's great to know, and it's I think it's comforting when you come across a confusing footnote. But also, there's a way into this, then you can learn more about it, and there's I'm sure there's still a lot of work to be done. Really, especially they're still discovering.
And I actually, one of the reasons I did this is I wrote a book because I realized, if I believe in inerrancy, I better know what text I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
So I thought textual criticism, people needed to know that.
Yeah.
And so I've got a book on this that includes both Old Testament and New Testament, how it's done. And they're both significantly different. So it's helpful to see them.
Yeah, sure. What's the name of the book?
A Student's Guide to Textual Criticism or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. That's good.
So I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Well, thank you for your help.
Yeah.
This has been a great lecture. I guess it's been more of a talk.
Yeah.
This is very, this has been great. This has been really, really good for me, at least.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.